the great Mark Lewisohn, who has the definitive biography on the Beatles available now. It is called The Beatles All These Years, Volume 1. Tune in. Mark, thank you so much for coming on Breakfast with the Beatles Sunday.
Thank you. I'm with the great Andre Gardner, so I'm happy too.
Hey, that's what I'm talking about, Mark. Now, of course, I've got to ask you, do you remember, because your memory is pretty amazing, your very first recollection of being aware of the Beatles, where you were?
No, not where I was, but I know I was about 5 years old, and it was in England in 1963, and I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Please Please Me. Over the years, I've kind of begun to doubt if it was Please Please Me or She Loves You, but I think it was Please Please Me. And then I heard She Loves You as well, and I was swept away, like so many other people were.
Now, you've done so much incredible research in this book. Has doing all this writing about the Beatles changed your opinion of them at all as musicians, cultural icons, or even as people?
Only my respect has gone up a few more notches, which I wouldn't have thought possible, but it has. I find this story endlessly fascinating and endlessly interesting, and as a researcher, endlessly giving. No matter how deep I dig, I still turn up really interesting stuff. And so my respect for the story knows no bounds. What I like about this first book, one of the many things that it shows, is that all the talents that they had when they were visible to the world, when they were famous, their music and their originality and their charisma, their personalities, their humor, was all there in Liverpool before they made it. So I enjoyed speaking to people who told me, the stories about the Beatles that were just hilariously funny or great evidence of their artistry even before we knew them.
You pointed out in an interview earlier that Paul McCartney chose not to participate in this project. Now, for you as a guy who wants to get all the facts right down to every last detail, in a way, was that kind of a good thing?
No, I'd have liked him to have been involved. It would have been good, but his involvement would have come at a cost, and that may possibly have been some measure of control. I mean, Paul does a lot of press interviews, a lot of media interviews, and always has, but his involvement with books is generally quite limited to those that he actually has a direct hand in. His own books, ideally, like the Beatles Anthology or Many Years From Now. And it's very important that this is an independent project. So though I was disappointed when he said no, I wasn't entirely surprised. They wouldn't authorize this book, and actually nor would I want them to. It's very important, absolutely crucial, that this book is independent and seen to be independent.
So that means Apple did not have final say whatsoever as to the content?
No one has interfered with the content of this book in any way, but I'm delighted to say that Apple did allow me to use certain key photographs, which they needn't have done, so that was very good. And Paul did answer some questions by email, which he needn't have done. And also Yoko was very kind in giving me permissions to do certain things, which I'm very much grateful for.
We are on the air with Mark Lewisohn, noted Beatles historian. Mark, I have every single one of your books, going back to the Beatles Live, of course, the Beatles Day by Day. Your Recording Sessions at Abbey Road book is my Bible, my main reference material. And we'll talk about that, too, in a few minutes, because that's actually coming out again for Beatles fans who might have missed it. It is kind of sad, of course, that Neil Aspinall passed away shortly after you did your first interview with him, yet he gave some incredible firsthand insight for this book. Was it easy for Neil to relive the past and tell his side of the story to you?
Oh, yeah. Neil never really spoke on the record when he was working for Apple, when he was working for the guys, as he called it. But he would, many a time I sat and had lunch with him or sat in his office at Apple, and he would tell me some very indiscreet things, but I guess he knew that he would say it to people who would respect his indiscretions. When he actually left Apple, he phoned me up and said, okay, I know you've been wanting to interview me forever. Let's do it. And we had one great session, and you can read in the book just how good it was. And then he died. So that was the end of that. And this story will never be as complete without him. Although the volumes 2 and 3, there's plenty of Neil in. There will be plenty of Neil in there. They would have been so much better if he was still with us.
What would you think was the most frustrating fact or story about the Beatles that you really wanted to validate, but for whatever reason weren't able to?
I think with this first volume, there aren't any. Actually, I think I pretty much got to everything I needed to. There were certain things I knew I needed to address, like strange anomalies about how the Beatles got their recording contract with George Martin, which I did figure out in the end, and also the dismissal of Pete Best was something that seems to have been a mystery for 50 years, though I'm not entirely sure why. And that is now, we've put that one to bed finally.
Yeah, it's pretty clear in your book, Mark.
It is pretty clear, and it puzzles me why it's been unclear, but it's certainly clear now. I'm glad you said that. No, I pretty much got to everybody I needed to get to and spoke to and got to every archive I needed to get to, because speaking to people for anecdotal evidence is one thing, and it's very much crucial to a book like this that you have that kind of real natural color. But on the other hand, I also go for proper research in libraries and archives and documents, and that's my main thing, is documents. And if I was offered the choice between an hour interview with Paul McCartney tomorrow or an hour of going through his files, I would go through his files.
Like a great researcher would.
Yeah, that's where the real story is. And the interviews, it's not as if he's never been interviewed before. He didn't speak to me for this book, but I've done like 15 interviews with him in the past, and they're in here anyway. So it's not, he is in this book speaking to me. It was just done earlier.
Sure, your interview with him for the Recording Sessions book was key.
Yeah, that was the first. That's actually two interviews worked into one in the book, and those were the first two times I interviewed him, but they were followed by many more.
On the back cover of your wonderful new book, The Beatles All These Years, Tune In Volume 1, you say, let's scrub what we know or think we know and start over. Can you give an example of you as the noted Beatles historian finding out something different about the band that you thought you knew? Without giving too much away, of course.
There's so much of it. I mean, it's kind of there on every page. I was intrigued to discover that they almost broke up before Brian Epstein took over their management. They were about to break up. Had he not come along, they not only might they not have made it, they might not have even existed, because they were bored. John and Paul and George were bored and looking for some new thing to do, some new diversion, because they had reached the top in Liverpool and had nowhere else to go and were tired already. Then the Beatles got very bored very quickly without any fresh challenges, and they always needed to move on. And again, that's something that we know from their recording career, but it was true too of their time before they ever made a record. There's just so much of it. The actual chemistry of the group is much more. When you really look at it, it's absolutely crucial to their togetherness, if you like, the friendships and the way that they related to one another, their method of communicating with one another. And I really wanted to look at the Beatles from the inside and from the outside, to look at their impact, but also to look at how they actually worked together.
And it really is, too, the story of the Beatles, a situation of confidence and determination paying off right from the early days.
They always had confidence, although sometimes that could be quite frail. Like, for example, when they played their fan club night at the Cavern in April 62, one of the best Cavern nights. I mean, the Cavern is written about in books as if it was just this kind of thing. They just played the Cavern. But within their time at the Cavern, they had good nights and great nights, and this was one of the great nights. And they actually asked from the stage for girls or boys in the audience, for whoever was in the audience, to write to them while they were away in Hamburg, because they worried that when they got back home, people might have lost their affection for them. So, and they took writing paper with them to Hamburg and wrote back to the fans from Hamburg, whoever wrote to them. So all these letters survive, and I've seen so many of them now. They're probably, I don't doubt there are more, but I've seen a lot of them. And they all convey nice little bits of information and tone and color, which in a book like this is so important. So that's an extraordinary thing. But at the same time, they were incredibly certain of themselves in so many other respects. And there's a quote from John Lennon that ends the book, which was that, we conquered Liverpool and we conquered Hamburg in Germany, and now it was just a matter of time before everybody else caught on.
This is Mark Lewisohn, our exceedingly special guest here on Breakfast with the Beatles Sunday. I had the pleasure of speaking with you, about 20 years ago with the release of the Complete Beatles Chronicle, and it's great to have you on the program again. Mark's new book, fantastic, just shy here in the U.S. of 1,000 pages, and talk about a page-turner. Every page is compelling. The Beatles, all these years, Volume 1, Tune In. Mark, would you be able to narrow down one or two people you would consider unsung heroes who didn't get the credit they deserved for helping the Beatles to carve their niche or find their way as successful artists?
Yeah, well, there's a guy in London, now deceased, unfortunately, called Kim Bennett. That wasn't his real name, that was his professional name. He had been a singer, and he was called Kim Bennett, and without him, the Beatles wouldn't have got a recording contract, and they wouldn't have been signed by George Martin. There's a long story about all this in the book, but basically the truth of the matter is that though George Martin very quickly tuned into how original and interesting the Beatles were, initially he was made to sign them. He didn't actually want to sign them, he was made to sign them. And that was a process that actually began with this guy called Kim Bennett, who's not mentioned in any of the books, but he was definitely crucial to everything that happened. Another one would be a guy that some people will have heard of, Alan Williams. Alan Williams was the Beatles' first manager, and everything he did for them pretty much fell within 1 year, 1960. In fact, it was mostly the last 7-8 months of that year, 1960. But before Alan Williams and after Alan Williams, the Beatles are two very completely different things. And after Alan Williams, because of the opportunities that he's opened up for them, they are the top band in Liverpool. They began as no-hopers kind of thing. Not no-hopers, but very amateurish and with very disorganized. And thanks to Alan Williams, they went to Hamburg in Germany. That whole thing happened because of him. And when they returned from Hamburg, they were dynamic. So Alan Williams is crucial. And because of certain things that have happened through the years, some people kind of make light of Alan Williams' contribution to this story, but he was crucial. And again, without him, it wouldn't have happened.
Glad to hear you say that. And man, that Kim Bennett, George Martin story knocked me out of my chair. That is one of the incredible revelations in Mark's great new book, The Beatles All These Years, Volume 1, Tune In, available now wherever you get your books. Is there anybody in the course of your interviewing and research, Mark, that didn't want to tell the story, that refused to tell what you may have considered giving crucial information about the Beatles?
I think the only one really was Pete Shotton, who was John Lennon's childhood best friend and was a member of the Quarrymen. He was John's partner in crime through their school years when they were the two mischievous boys who were always getting into trouble. I would have loved to have spoken to Pete, but I think he's kind of beagled out. He's done, probably he would feel too many interviews, and he's done his book. And maybe he feels that's enough. And I would have liked to have got to him. I got to so many other of John's friends, but I never got to Pete. But one of the things about this book is that it's not necessary for the witnesses to this history to have talked only to me. As long as they've talked to someone or written a book or whatever it might be, if it's relevant and if it's germane to what I'm writing, I will quote it and say where it comes from. So Pete Shotton is still quoted in this book. It just wasn't with me. And maybe I would have asked him some different questions that he hadn't been asked before, or maybe not, I don't know, because he just didn't want to do it. And you have to respect that. Not everyone's going to want to say yes. But I got a very, very large percentage of yeses, probably 99%. And I'll accept that.
And your footnoting is fantastic. Of course, I, like many other Beatles fans, are finding myself reading the section, then going back to the back and reading the footnote, because you write great information back there as well.
Yeah, there's the stuff at the back is where I can just have a little bit more, be a bit more loose and just be more me and put some jokes in and things that I found along the way that aren't exactly, they don't need to be on the main page, but they're incidental and they're probably worth putting down on paper. So that's where they all live, at the back of the book.
Now, Mark, you mentioned something very interesting with regard to the Decca audition on January 1st of 1962, and I guess it was always in the back of my mind somewhere, but I just couldn't bring myself to feel this way. But I feel like you've conveyed the fact, too, that they kind of blew it. They really did kind of blow that audition. It wasn't a sense of Dick Rowe and these guys having tin ears and not recognizing the talent of the band. They could have done better, but they didn't.
They could have done so much better. They were nervous in the studio. They didn't. The studio was not their environment. They'd not really been in one before. It was really cold. It was cold in the studio as well as outside. And Pete was. He looked good in the group, but he did not bind their sound like a drummer should. And they knew that. They were unhappy with him, and the Decca people didn't think much of Pete that day either. They just turned in a bad session, basically. And just as well that they did, because it would have been awful if they had been signed to Decca, and they wouldn't have had George Martin, and they wouldn't have had Abbey Road, and things would have been very different. So just as well they blew it, really. But they blew it for all sorts of reasons, which I think it was just too early, you know? Mm-hmm. They weren't ready for it yet. They needed to be a bit more polished and a bit more professional before they could really find their feet in the studio.
How is it that pretty pristine copies of that audition managed to leak out to the hands of bootleggers in the 70s? Where did that come from? I
honestly don't know. I really don't know how that happened. I don't know who had the tapes in the first place and leaked them out, and how that person got them. It's a story I'd love to know more about, and I don't know it.
This is Mark Lewisohn, noted Beatles historian and author of just an incredibly new biography, the definitive one, the one that's going to be in colleges before too long. The Beatles, All These Years, Volume 1, Tune In, just shy of 1,000 pages here in the United States, and available now wherever you buy your books. Now, Mark, in the UK, you've got the very special author's cut that's about 300 pages more than the U.S. edition, which I'm all fired up to get. Is there any chance that that's going to be available here in the U.S., or is that strictly a U.K. edition?
It's 700 pages, actually. It's 1,728 pages.
Wow.
Bound in 2 books, which is in a box. I didn't really want to get into this creating a special edition business like so many artists do with their albums these days. But the reality is I wrote a very, very, very big book here, far too big for the mass market edition. And the publishers quite naturally and understandably said, well, this is all very well, but we do still need the edition that ordinary people might buy, because not many casual buyers are going to pick up a book of 1,700 pages. So they said, my UK publisher said, we will still publish this, but you need to create a smaller edition as well. So I spent 3 months this year, the beginning of this year, going through abridging it. Now, it's still the complete story in the abridged version. Those who buy it, you're not missing anything, but those who get the other edition will get more levels and more layers, more texture, more anecdotes, more quotes, more context. And as for whether it's coming out in the States, well, that's up to my U.S. publisher, Crown Archetype, who have yet to make that decision. If they do bring it out, it'll be out in time for February, for the 50th anniversary of the Sullivan Show. But if they don't bring it out, then I hope you'll be able to buy it in the U.S. on import. You can buy it anyway on import through Amazon.co.uk. But all being well, it'll actually be published here. But it isn't my decision, that. It's the publishers.
I will personally beg Megan Parrott myself when I get off the phone with you to get that released here.
Do, please. I would love it to come out here. I don't want this to be something that you have to, pay shipping across the Atlantic for. I want it to actually be here in the States.
Goodness, it'll be worth it. Now, Mark, you mentioned about Pete Shotton. Do you ever get Beatled out yourself?
Me? No, never. Never, not for a minute. Never have, and I'm sure I never will. I'm just endlessly interested in all of this, and very, very happy indeed to be spending all my time doing this. I mean, this is what I do for a job, and I have a normal life outside as well, with a wife and 2 lovely grown-up children, but at the same time, when you work for yourself, there is a tendency to work every hour if you get the opportunity. So I do work a lot of hours, but it's a great job.
It sure is.
Great job. I love my job.
Now, let me ask you this. Have you figured out where Volume... I know this is so far away, but have you figured out where you want Volume 3, the final volume of the trilogy, to end? Is it going to end with a breakup or Free as a Bird?
No, it's certainly not going to go on as far as Free as a Bird. I honestly don't know where it's going to go. I really don't know. In fact, who knows? Maybe it even will include Free as a Bird. I really don't know. I don't want to know yet. It's not important that I should decide this yet. If I decide it now, then I'll be shaping all my thinking between now and then towards this thing that I thought in a hotel room in New York, which is where I am right now, in November 2013. That won't be relevant. The material will tell me. The Beatles always, the way they worked was the best way, which was to have no preconceived ideas. And if anyone tries to impose a boundary, or even if they impose one on themselves, in a way it limits them. And I don't want this book to be limited in any way. It will tell me where it should end. Volume 2, the same thing. I don't know where it ends and Volume 3 begins at this point, and I don't need to know. But when I get there, I'll know.
Are you taking any sort of break before working on Volume 2, or are you already nose deep in piles of papers already?
Well, I'm here in the U.S. Just now at the end of a very long promotional trip, and this kind of was my break. Talking about the
Beatles.
Yeah, there's no time to lose. I've got to get back and crack on with Volume 2, and because it won't be done quickly. It shouldn't be done quickly. It should be done properly.
Now, heaven forbid, Mark, if you decide all of a sudden to become a monk in the Himalayas and take a vow of silence for the rest of your life, is this material going to be available for someone to pick it up?
Well, I'm never going to become a monk in the Himalayas taking a vow of silence. Me, a vow of silence. Yeah. I might be a monk in the Himalayas singing Tomorrow Never Knows. But,
now we're talking.
I know what you're saying. You mean if I was to be run over by a bus tomorrow?
Oh, heaven forbid, I would never say that, no.
Yeah, but it's the same kind of thing. I don't know what would happen, to be honest. I need to make proper plans in that respect. But, so much of the material is now gathered. I would like my collection ultimately to go to a library or a place of learning, an institution of some kind, so that it could be available for the benefit of others and for writers in the future. But first of all, I want to make use of it. So I'm not walking under any buses.
Certainly not.
That's my plan.
This is Mark Lewisohn, who has written the definitive biography of the Beatles. My least favorite part was the end, because what do I do now? Read the entire book. It's fantastic. You know what I'm doing, Mark? I'm reading it again. That's all I can do.
Fantastic. Well, there's a lot in there to digest. So I think it's probably worth more than one read.
Marco, when the Beatles Remasters came out in 2009, of course, it was wonderful that material had gotten cleaned up and sounds better than it could possibly have sounded on CD. But I have to admit, as a hardcore Beatles fan who loves minutia, I was a bit taken aback by some of the liberties that were taken in the remastering process. For example, the popped P's in I'm a Loser, or the guitar click at the bridge of Strawberry Fields Forever. I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
To be absolutely honest, I didn't even know that those things had been done. I hadn't even noticed it. I have the remasters. The first thing I did was load them up into iTunes, and I put them on my iPod and my iPad and my iPhone, and but I didn't. I'm not an audiophile. I'm fascinated by every aspect of the Beatles, but I'm not an audiophile. And mostly when I'm playing the music, I'm singing along with it, and therefore not necessarily hearing these little differences that have been made. I'm surprised to hear you say that they made these changes. What was the one on Strawberry Fields? Oh,
there's the part at the very end, that guitar, that as somebody, I still think that's Paul playing that part, by the way, hits the pickup with a guitar right at the end of that. It's gone on the remaster.
Wow.
And it stands out like a sore thumb to me. And I understand their reason for polishing it up, but in my opinion, that went a little bit too far.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that they actually interfered with the content of the music in some way. Are you sure it wasn't gone on any previous mixes?
None that I have heard.
Okay, yeah.
No. And certainly in I'm a Loser, all the popped P's, not what I appear to be, are gone on the remaster.
Right. Wow.
Which I found.
I shall go home to England and check it out.
That'd be great. Now, to your knowledge, has EMI made digital copies of every single reel of Beatles tape recorded, including the multi-track masters, every mix and studio documents?
To my knowledge, yes.
Thankfully. So it will be preserved in perpetuity then.
Yeah, I think they're safe.
Now, in 1963, July 1st, when they did She Loves You, I found it odd that late on, when the Beatles were so successful, that the master tape of that song would somehow be destroyed. Is there a chance in the world that it's misfiled somewhere in the archive? Or do you think it's gone forever?
I think it's gone, but I have learned with the Beatles never to say never to anything, because things can pop up that you're not expecting. But it's certainly not in the library, in the tape library, and I can't imagine it would be anywhere else. I think that was probably a surprisingly difficult session for them, because we do know that the release version of She Loves You is a combination of a number of edits. So it could well be that for some reason they weren't able to put down a complete take. I don't know if that's true, because we also don't have the documentation for it either. But that may well be the case. They played it live brilliantly every time, very strong. But maybe they had difficulty. Maybe the session tape was got rid of for a reason. I don't know. But they're pretty much all the tapes that are missing from the archive are missing from the first 12 months. After that, everything is there. So it's not the only one that's missing. So there may be no conspiracy here, just housekeeping.
And to your point about the edits in the song She Loves You, I do have to give props to the remastering team at Abbey Road, because that She Loves You on the remaster sounds better than it's ever sounded.
Yeah, when they first put it out on CD, it was quite embarrassing.
You could hear those edits a mile away.
Yeah, much more so than you'd ever heard them on the record.
There is so much material in those vaults where they could easily put out some more volumes of anthology. Of course, for me, the Holy Grail is Take 3 of Helter Skelter, the 2711 version, but Carnival of Light, the first band take of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, even the last 20, 25 seconds of I Want You, She's So Heavy. And even that Delane Lee jam session on June 1st of 67, I love to hear. Do you ever think we'll get to hear that, Mark?
I know of no plans, but who knows? I mean, it's well possible that something will in time come out. But at the moment, I don't think they have any intention of putting it out. But you never know what's coming next. I mean, if you're in it for the long haul, and it could be a few more years yet, anything's possible.
If you want the definitive biography on the Beatles, go no further than The Beatles All These Years, Volume 1, Tune In, by noted Beatles historian and author Mark Lewisohn. This has been a labor of love, which has been well over 8 years in the making, and there is no comparison. Mark gets the story and tells it in an absolutely beautiful way, and we are so thrilled that you took time to come on Breakfast with the Beatles with us, Mark.
Great, lovely. I'm really pleased to be on the show. Thanks a lot, Andre.